Welcome to tonight's talk on the Kerygma. I know that some of you are looking up at the word on the screen and wondering how to pronounce that. Now you know, it's Kerygma. It's a Greek word, and in general, it means proclamation or preaching. But over the centuries, it's come to mean a very specific thing, which is the basic proclamation of the Christian faith. So Kerygma now has a very specific meaning, the most basic, the most essential, the most fundamental proclamation of the Christian faith. Not all the bells and whistles, what's at its core. So that's what we're going to cover tonight. If you heard me announce the talk, or if you received the email, you know that I asked a few provocative questions in trying to promote everybody coming here tonight. And I didn't mean for it to morph into what it is, but I did ask these questions, so let's go through them. The questions are, why is the world so messed up? Have you noticed that? That's why you're here, right? He's going to answer this. We'll see. How does God fix it? Why did Jesus have to save us? What does that mean? And in the epic battle between good and evil, who wins and why? So we're going to see if the Kerygma answers this, and if it does, let's go ahead and dive in. So first of all, what is the Kerygma? What's the basic understanding of this? Now, the Kerygma, as the basic proclamation of the Christian faith, boils down to three things. God loves you, sin messes things up, and Jesus saves you. That's pretty basic. And most people will look at that and go, yeah, I get that. I've got that. I don't know why I'm here at this talk. I got that. But really understanding what's up there is a lot more profound than a lot of people think. So sometimes there's a little bit of fine-tuning that helps bring the faith into focus. So that's the basic things that happens, and then therefore we should respond with our faith and how we live out our lives. So the reason that we need to tweak this sometimes is a lot of people have been taught a very childlike understanding of what being saved means, because they have a very childlike understanding of what sin is. And we're going to tackle that. A lot of people think that that sins can be defined as there's some man-made list of things called sins, that if we do something on that list, then somebody in authority has the right to shame us because we did something bad. That's not what a sin is. Not even close. But that's what the world would like you to think it is, because then you can sort of make fun of it and ignore them. But that's not what it is. And it's really important to get this right, because it's fundamental. And what we believe translates into how we live. And God wants us to live authentically and truthfully, so it's important to know what this actually means. So how do we get the right understanding? Well, Father John Riccardo, anybody ever heard Father John Riccardo speak? I love him. He's great. Fantastic communicator, and I've stolen a bunch of this talk directly from him. So if you've heard him, you might recognize some of this. At least the skeleton. I've added some things to it, but he deserves credit for at least half of this talk. He says, as far as getting the right understanding, he says, if you understand the first 3 chapters of Genesis correctly, then the whole rest of your faith makes sense. But if you misunderstand something in those first 3 chapters, then things don't fit together quite right and can be confusing. It's not stable. So we're going to go through that. So it's the first 3 chapters of Genesis. You know the stories, even if you don't know which chapter they fit into. Chapter 1, God creates the world. Chapter 2, God creates Adam and Eve. Chapter 3, the fall. Somebody eats an apple and everybody gets messed up. That's sort of what it is. Now, the early chapters of Genesis, the first 11 chapters of Genesis, are what's called inspired poetry. Inspired means through the Spirit. Inspired, Spirit, get it? So inspired comes from the Spirit through a human author. God is speaking through a human author. That's the inspired part. And it's written in a poetic manner. And we need to understand that so that we understand the words properly, because it's written in a different manner than most of the rest of the Bible and most of the rest of the stuff that we read all the time for information. But poetry can convey some really serious truths. We just sometimes don't realize that. If I said to you, for instance, okay, we're all out here on a Thursday night, you've all given up your time to find out a little bit more about God, to get a little closer to God, And it warms my heart to see you all here tonight. Have I conveyed a truth to you? Does anybody really think my heart got warm? It didn't. But I've conveyed a serious truth to you. As a matter of fact, it's more profound than if I gave you the scientific definition. Well, you know, I saw you all here, my endorphin levels went up, and the adrenaline, that would mean nothing. But if I say it warms my heart to see you, you understand. But I'm speaking poetically. It's not literal. But sometimes the larger truths in our life have to be conveyed poetically, because it's the only way to get those truths across. And the first 11 chapters of Genesis, especially the first 3 that we're going to cover tonight, are poetic in nature, because God's trying to convey very large truths to us. So we have to pick that up. Sometimes you need to go into the realm of poetry to convey the largest truths. In fact, the beginning of Genesis conveys truths that are larger than any scientific or intellectual truth, larger than any of them. Now, I'm a math and science guy. I love math and science. I love getting into facts and figures and figuring out how things work. I love that stuff. But science has limits. There's no telescope that can see far enough to see God. It can't happen. Science is confined to the natural world. So the only way that we can get the revelation from God to understand what he was thinking when he created the universe was to hear it from him. Luckily, we've got some inspired poetry at the beginning of Genesis to let us know what he was thinking, because he wanted to convey that. So science can only figure out how something works, but even though I'm a science and math guy, sometimes I like to know why things work the way they do. And for that, we've got to turn to God. Only God can tell us why things work the way they do. And he does so in the Bible, especially at the beginning of Genesis, through his Son, and he does so poetically. It's the way things work. So when we talk about this, and we talk about the very beginning of Genesis and the creation story, a lot of college professors would like us to believe that, well, all the creation stories are pretty much all the same. If you go to any of the creation stories that were around at the time, they're all the same. And they always say the flood. Everybody's got the flood. Well, if there was a real flood, then all the creation stories would have a flood. But only one of them was inspired by God. To understand how amazing Genesis is compared to the rest of the world at the time, let's sort of step back and take a look at the common features of the ancient Near East creation stories. Because everybody loves figuring out the origin story. So the storytellers love to figure out, okay, this is how we started. But they're trying to come up with it with their own human imagination. Only one came from God. So I haven't been clicking the button. Genesis 1, 2, 3. Inspired poetry. Why versus how. You're in charge of telling me. If I talk for like 3 minutes and I haven't hit the button, just throw something at me. There is one section where I don't talk I don't click for a little bit. Anyway, so let's go into comparing origin stories. So in the ancient Near East, all of the origin stories have certain things in common. There were many so-called gods. There was a bunch of them. They were bad and violent. Sometimes they were downright cruel. And the creation of the universe, or the creation of Earth itself, happened as a byproduct of either sex or violence. That's the way all the creation stories work. There was no ultimate power. No one God was in control. And I use God with a lowercase g, by the way, the so-called gods. No God, lowercase g, was in power because they were all fighting with each other. It was all chaos. That's what they all have in common. And the important thing for us is men and women had very specific roles. Men were slaves to the gods, and women only had one role, and that was to bear children. That was it. All of the ancient Near East creation stories all have this kind of stuff in common. Now let's compare that to Genesis, because the way I look at it is God was looking down, seeing all these origin stories going, they're getting it wrong. And eventually he taps on somebody's shoulder and says, I'm going to whisper in your ear, you write it down. Inspired poetry. So Genesis tells us that there's one God. There's one true God. He's good. He's not violent. He's not cruel. He's not crazy or chaotic. He's orderly. He's good. All good. And everything he creates is good. He creates out of love, not out of need. He creates effortlessly. One of the things that it's easy to miss when you read chapter 1 of Genesis, which takes all of one page. And it's really easy to find. It's the first page of text in your Bible. So if you want to go home and check me tonight, go in and read the first page of Genesis and realize how calm everything is. There's no chaos. There's no fighting. There's no effort involved. He just speaks things into existence. Ultimate power. We can't understand that because we're finite. When we think about a big job, everything that has to go into it, he's infinite. Doing everything is easy. Just speak it into existence. Very calm. Creates effortlessly. And the number one thing that's important for us is at the end of that chapter, at the end of the first page of the Bible, the pinnacle of creation is man and woman. We are the pinnacle of creation. Everything gets created so that we can be here. Everything. And we find out that man and woman are created co-equal in dignity, and they're meant to share in God's own divine life. That's what the purpose was for us to be created. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a very quick summary of Genesis 1, a very quick summary of Genesis 2, and then I'm going to spend a little bit more time on Genesis 3 because that's where it gets interesting. So Genesis 1, God creates the world in 6 days. Now, as a math and science guy, and I spent the first 48 years of my life not believing in God, but I knew these stories because even if you don't believe in God, you know the stories. As a math and science guy, I hear the world was created in 6 days, and I automatically go, no way. I know how long it takes for swirling balls of gas to create a star. No way, 6 days, no, it can't happen. But the Old Testament was written in Hebrew, and the word that is translated as day is yom. And yom very often means day, but it really means any defined period of time, any logical period of time. So a presidential administration could be a yom. The Stone Age can be a yom. Your lifetime can be a yom. It's any defined period of time. So the amount of years it takes for the stars to congeal is a yom, poetically. He's speaking poetically. So that's that. And we can't say that the days went by as, well, when the sun went around the earth, because the sun isn't created until the 4th yom. So you can't count it by that. That doesn't work. So he creates effortlessly and without rivals. And everything he creates is good. Everything he creates is good. Good, 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 good. It's important. Now, throughout the 6 days, he sort of lists a whole bunch of things. He lists the fact that he created the sun, the moon, the stars, the beasts, the oceans, all that kind of stuff. And I find it interesting because, for instance, the sun was one of those things that ancient civilizations worshipped as a god. So here's God, the real God, explaining to people basically, stop worshiping the creature, the created thing. I created that. Start worshiping God. So every one of those is something, and you look through Genesis 1, everything that he mentions that he creates is something that somebody else is worshiping, as if it was a god. Sun, the moon, the stars, the oceans, the beasts, all of that stuff. So he's explaining that. And again, creature, because I use the word creature a lot, it means created thing. A rock is a creature, for instance, even though it's not alive, it's a creature, it's a created thing. Explain that because I often don't explain that. It's not good. So what I like is in verse 16, Genesis explains that he makes the great light for the day and the lesser light for the night, and he created the stars too. He created the stars too. 5 words. He created the stars too. Now, when Father John Riccardo explains this, he spends a lot of time on Genesis 1, a lot of time on Genesis 2. I don't have the time to do this, but he does highlight this one, which I love. He says, if you're a scientific kind of guy and you like listening to the scientific folks, they'll tell you that there's about 100 billion stars in our galaxy alone. And each star is enormous. I mean, our sun is a star, but it's a relatively small star in the grand scheme of things. And there's 100 billion of them in our galaxy. And then there's about 100 billion or more galaxies out there, each one with 100 billion stars. Do the math on that. It's a number that's larger than, I don't know, heptillion something. I don't know. It's a lot of zeros. It's a lot of stars. It's a lot of work. And as a finite creature, I look at that and I go, that's an incredible, that should rank more than 5 words. But for God, that's not the important part. That's not the important part. 5 words. Save the ink. I got to tell them over and over and over again during this first page, everything I created was good. On the first day, he creates something and he says, and it was good. Second day, he creates something and it was good. He's making the point poetically over and over and over and over again that everything he created was good. So he says that. He's got grandeur and ultimate power. Everything is just spoken into existence easily. There's a logical progression as you go through one page of creation, and you see that what it culminates in, the pinnacle of creation, is you. Hung the stars in the sky, all of them, so that you would have an intelligible universe to look up to and go, wow, that's cool. Everything was created so that you could be here. Not here tonight, but, here in general. But here tonight is better, So anyway, so that's Genesis 1. Genesis 2, God creates Adam and Eve. We know this story. And we find that men and women are created equal in dignity. And this is sometimes confused because some people start right here. This is the second page of the Bible. Some people look at and find this one sentence and go, look at this. It's the patriarchy. It's the women are subject to the men and all this kind of stuff because they see this one sentence. I will make a helper for him. This is right after God sees the first thing that's wrong with the world, right? It's this is good, this is good, this is good. What's the first thing that God says is wrong? It is not good for man to be alone. Therefore, I will make a helper for him. That word helper sounds like, some scrub maid, some lowly person that's going to be subservient to the man. Not so. The Hebrew word that is translated as helper in that sentence is ezer. And ezer is used 19 times in the Old Testament. 17 out of those 19 times, it refers to God's divine help for man. So ezer is not some scrub-made subservient thing to man, because God is not going to describe himself that way. He's saying it's divine help. Divine help. We are made equal in dignity. No question about it. He also reveals in Genesis 2 that we are made in his image and likeness. And that's interesting because God has all sorts of qualities and he wants to share all of them with us. So we learn later that our purpose is to be with him forever in heaven, but we learn that later in the Bible. That's in the second letter of Peter. We learn that we are made to share in the divine nature. That's our ultimate destination. But all of this that I just described in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 leads to a big question. It's a logical question. I've had this question in the past until I worked through it. If God is good and everything he created was good, then why is everything so obviously messed up? Because it's rather obvious. So as wonderful as science is, and I love science, when it's done correctly. In the last few years, maybe not so much. But I grew up when science was actually done with the scientific method. And I love science. But it can't answer this question. Because this question is a why question. And science isn't capable of answering why questions when it comes to the structure of the world and why it's put together. It can only answer how questions. So let's see if we can answer this why question, starting with a what question. What was unique about God creating man and woman? What was unique that certainly doesn't appear anywhere in the ancient Near East creation stories, where God said, I'll create them in my image and likeness? Again, nowhere else in the ancient Near East do we hear this. Oh, I keep looking up here as if I'm supposed to click. This is the part where I talk for a little while and I don't click. So I'm just anxious because I'm going, okay, anyway. So we're made in his image and likeness. So we have all these qualities that come from God. We're like miniature copies, in imperfect copies, but miniature copies in that sense, in a strange sense. I probably shouldn't use that word. But one of the qualities that we have, which is an incredible gift, is we all have free will. It's an incredible, incredible gift. And it's an example of just how much God loves us, is the fact that we have free will. Now, free will happens to be like it's definitely one of my favorites. It might be the favorite topic for me to talk about. I love talking about free will and all the implications of free will. I've only got a couple of minutes to hit a couple of things here. Freedom is not supposed to be the capacity to do anything we want. That's not what freedom was designed for. That's not why God gave it to us. It's not freedom, as Father John Ricardo says. That's lawlessness. Just doing anything you want is lawlessness. It doesn't work out very well. If you want proof of that, on the way home tonight, use your free will, exercise your free will, and drive on the wrong side of the road to get home. Don't send me the bill. I can just see the emails now. I'm not suggesting anybody do this. But we all know it's an orderly universe. There's order to things. And if we follow that order, things work out well. And if we don't, we don't. Things don't. So our freedom, God gave us the right to choose, but that doesn't mean that every choice is right. We have to know what God gave us free will for. And the number one reason God gave us free will was so that we can love. Because God is love. It's the way we get back to heaven. It's what he wants for all of us and from all of us. Love is everything, and to love, you need free will. Can you imagine, think about somebody very close to you, a spouse, a parent, a family member, a child. Think about the love that they show towards you, and imagine if there wasn't free will involved. If for some reason they just had to do it. It was just, that was mechanic, it just had to happen. Would that be love? Would it have the same meaning at all? Would it warm your heart? Getting back to that poetic thing. No, you can't even really define it as love. I mean, you cannot define love without free will. It certainly doesn't have any meaning. So that's the primary reason we have free will, but there's other reasons as well. There's other reasons we use it for, but they're lesser. You know, the ability to forgive requires free will. To have faith, to form relationships, to pursue ambitions, to choose careers. And because of free will, we have moral responsibility. Again, our culture would like to think that we don't have moral responsibility, but we do because we got free will from God. So it's the way it works. Now, of all of the creatures, and I already mentioned rocks and blades of grass as creatures, of all of God's creatures, only humans and angels have received free will. And because of that, only humans and angels are capable of being disobedient to God. Rocks can't do it. Your dog can't do it. We and angels can do it. And so people go, aha, now I know where the fall is. Genesis 3, the fall, somebody, didn't use their free will correctly, that upset God, and now we're all being punished for eternity. No, that's not it. A lot of people have the idea of the fall of Genesis 3 of God planted a tree in the middle of the garden for no particular reason at all. He then said, you can eat of any of these other trees, but not that tree. And he said that for no particular reason at all. And then when they did do that, it upset God, and he kicked them out of paradise. That's not the way to understand Genesis 3. It's an improper summary of Genesis 3. Let's go to Genesis 3, the fall. Anybody know the name of the tree in the middle of the garden? I heard tree of life and I heard tree of knowledge of good and evil. Both of those are the two trees that we know the name of. Which one is in the middle that it says don't eat of? It's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The tree of life comes a little later. It's still in Genesis 3, but it's a little bit later. The one that messes everything up is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is not an apple. It's not a test. It's not some arbitrary rule that God put in place to see whether or not they would obey. That's not the way it works. But more importantly, it's not an apple. It's the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But that's a mouthful, so I guess we'll just shorten it to apple. I can understand why it got that way. So having the tree present, and we only know the name of two of the trees, but we know that there's a bunch of trees. And yet all these trees represent the various aspects of God's life that he wants to share with us. We happen to know that the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that's one aspect of his life, and the tree of life. And there's others. He says, you can eat of all of that. I want to share all of myself with you. I want to share everything that I am. But don't eat of that tree, because on the day you eat of that, you shall surely die, which is a rather strong wording. I haven't been clicking. He wants to share everything with us, and on the day you eat of that tree, you will surely die. What does that mean? Well, to eat from the tree means to try and make it our own, to make that quality our own. And man is simply not capable of doing that based upon what that tree represents. That tree represents being able to label something as good and evil, which only God can do. Go back to Genesis 1. Created all these things, and they're good. Created all these things, and they're good. Found something else, and that's not good. He's able to do that because he's the creator. As much as he loves us, as much as he wants to share his life with us, we're not creators, and he can't make us creators. He is the only creator. And that tree, we simply don't have the power to do it. It's not like God says, man, you can't do that. He's saying, man, you can't do that. The only person capable of running that tree is me. It's just the way it is, because I'm the creator. When you create stuff, you can label it good and evil. When you try and relabel it, bad things happen. So don't do that. There's only one creator. But then we try and relabel everything. We see something that's bad and we want it, so we relabel it as good. That's a good, I want that. Or it's something good that we should be doing. We say, no, that's a bad, I don't want to do that. We relabel it. We don't have the power to do that. Think about what Eve did. When she reached for the apple, which was said bad, on the day you eat of that, you shall surely die. That's bad. So God gave her the warning. Gave Adam the warning, who passed it on to her. When she reached for the apple, in order to do that, she had to push God away with this arm. And when she did that, she's pushing away the author of life. You push away life, you die. Poetically, spiritually. On the day you eat of that, because of what I know you're going to have to do, you shall surely die. And this is the problem. So, only God, haven't been doing it. If we try, we cut ourselves off from God. God is life. We cut ourselves off from life, we die. So when God says, on the day you eat of that, you shall surely die, he meant it. He was just giving us a shorthand. Don't do that. Sometimes shorthand is the only thing that we need to hear. If you imagine I'm not going to suggest anybody try this either. When you go home tonight, in your kitchen, turn on the gas stove or turn on the thing that glows red really pretty. The thing that makes everything hot in the stove. It's a really pretty red. It's really pretty red. And you go, oh, that's really pretty. I want to touch that. And you go, no, I don't want to do that. Now, if you did that, you'd burn yourself. And you wouldn't want to do that. God doesn't want you to hurt yourself either. So what he's doing is he's telling us, on the day you eat of that, you shall surely die. Not as a punishment, but as a consequence of the fact that you just did something stupid. I'm going to warn you about it because I love you, but you're going to have to trust me. So not as a punishment. If you reach for that red stove, you wouldn't have your hand burned because somebody came in and punished you and burned your hand. It would be burned simply as a consequence of you doing that. So you don't want to do that. Now step back and imagine there's a toddler in the house, either yours or someone else's, and they see the red glow and they start running in. First thing you can do is, no, don't do that. Trust me. Are you going to try and explain it to them? And how, at a certain temperature, the skin, no, you're not going to explain it. You're just going to say, no, don't do that. Trust me. That's what God's doing. No, don't do that. Trust me. You might not even understand it if I explain it to you. No, don't do that. And we have to choose whether or not we trust God. God's saying, will you trust me? So that's where we're at. Now, everything that for those of you who know the story, even if you're not a Bible scholar, you recognize the story that I just told, right? I left one really important feature out of that story. What did I leave out of the story? Satan, the serpent, the snake. I heard all of those. All of that's correct. I refer to him as the enemy with a capital E, because I don't like saying his name. So we'll just refer to him as the enemy for the rest of the talk. And to understand the good news, we have to understand the bad news properly. And to understand the bad news, we have to talk about the enemy and how the enemy fits into this. That's really important. Who is the enemy? Well, the enemy started out as an angel, but rebelled. The enemy started out as an angel, good, but with free will, and free will opens up the possibility of choosing the wrong way. And he did. Everything God created was good. He was good, created good, but he rebelled. Now, because we put enemy in capital E, or any of the other names that you just gave him, and we usually use the capital letter because he's so important and so much of a pain in the neck, we tend to think that, well, there's two gods and they're fighting it out, good and evil fighting it out, and, oh, we're just going to wait and see who wins. No, that's not it. There are not two gods. There is one God. This is an angel who's fallen, still a creature. So just like any other creature, a rock, a blade of grass, or whatever, God can go poof, and just be done with it. It's not a match. God does not have any rivals. Has no equals. There is only one God. Throw that as a tangent here when we're talking about the enemy. Why did the enemy rebel? This is also important to understand. We find out about halfway through the Bible in the book of Wisdom, chapter 2, that through the devil's envy, death entered the world. That refers to Genesis 3. Now, the word envy is very close to the word jealousy, but they are different. I could be jealous of a talent that you have, of some skill that you have. And it might, I could use it wrong and be jealous and picky and all that kind of stuff, but it might, my jealousy of your skill might spur me on to develop that skill within myself, and there would actually be a good thing that came out of my jealousy of that. More often than not, that it's bad, but it could be good. Envy's different. Envy doesn't just say that I want the skill that you have or I want what you have. It bothers me that you have it. That's envy. Anybody know anybody who's envious? Are they really fun to be around? You hear them talking about everybody else who's got stuff, and it's bad. Jealousy, maybe good. Envy, not. So why is the enemy envious? Well, because at the beginning of time, God shared the plan, which was he was going to create us, that we would share in his life. And the angel said, no, we're so much more powerful. That's not right. And some chose against. The one big guy, he's probably got bigger wings than the rest of them or whatever. And about a third of them, a third of the angels fell. That's what tradition tells us. He's envious of us, not God. Because he's envious of the party that we're going to have in heaven. He doesn't want that to happen. And he goes to war against us, not God. He can't pick a fight with God. He would be destroyed. You don't pick a fight with God. But he's stronger than us. We have to know that. So he picks a fight with us because he wants to break up that party in heaven. What's the enemy's strategy? Whoop, hang on. Oh no! He lies. Whoa, that was kind of cool. The enemy's strategy is he lies. He lies about the nature of God in an attempt for us to not trust God. And he lies about the nature of sin in an attempt to have us choose against God, for us to do this. He says, oh, it's no big deal, right? It's what he does in Genesis, it's what he does today. God says things like, God doesn't add to your life, he limits your life. If God loved you, he'd let you have that, but he's not letting you have that, so therefore he doesn't love you. Get those whispers in your ear. He tries to deceive us into thinking that we can have true joy, true happiness without God, which is impossible because God is the author of all good things. The enemy has nothing to offer, but he lies and makes us think that. The enemy's strategy worked against Adam and Eve. She didn't eat of the apple until after she was tempted. And it's the same lie that he works on us today. Now, for the next couple of minutes, it's going to get a little dark. Not light-wise, but talk-wise. I promise it gets better in a few minutes. But in order to understand, it's not going to get really, really dark, but it's going to get a little serious. And he doesn't want me to tell you this part of the story. What is the enemy's goal? I do have additional batteries. You know what? I'm going to get the batteries. I have a feeling that's what it is. Right when I get to the important part, the clicker doesn't work. Isn't that amazing? St. Michael, the archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who work prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. I'm glad I didn't mess that up while I was in front of everyone. Anyway. Now it works. Look at that. It's just batteries. It wasn't the enemy. Okay. I should test that before I start. Well, I did, but anyway. Okay, so what's the enemy's goal? What's his end game? Gospel of John 10:10 tells us that the thief, the enemy, comes to steal, to kill, and to destroy. Father John points out the kill is in the middle there, as if there's something worse than being killed, and there is. The thief comes to steal you away from God, to kill you, and his goal is to destroy you. I told you it's going to get a little dark for a second. I promise it gets better. But we have to understand the bad stuff to really revel and rejoice in the good. The enemy wants to kill you and worse. He wants to capture you. He wants to own you. He despises us with a passion that we cannot understand. And he lies in order to get us to sin. Why? What are the consequences of sin? Well, some would say that sin separates us from God, and that's correct, but it's far more deadly than that. Most people think of sins, actions, things that we do or do not do, and people think of that way. But primarily, and more importantly, sin is a power. It's an entity. It's a kingdom. It's something that can own you. Father Ricardo says, we sell ourselves into slavery to sin and to powers that we cannot compete against. We don't understand how important it is to understand this. We get captured by sin. In the letter to the Romans, St. Paul says that we are enslaved to sin. Not that we're inclined to sin, we are, but we are enslaved to sin. It's far more important. Elsewhere in Romans, Paul says that all men are under the power of sin. Again, not just inclined to it, but under the power of it. To illustrate this, I'll ask everyone, think back through your life, have you ever done something that you didn't want to do, you hated the fact that you were about to do it, and you knew you shouldn't do it, but you did it anyway? That's the power of sin. That's captured. That's being captured. That's being owned. You don't want to do it. You know it's wrong. You hate the fact that you're going to do it, and you do it anyway. You're not calling the shots. Where's your free will? Sin. So, now, note, there are small sins and there are big sins, okay? I'm talking about the big ones, but we don't want to neglect the small ones because the small ones often lead to the big ones. So we don't want to ignore those, but there are gradations. So being enslaved by sin is more than just being addicted to something. It's being powerless to resist it. Completely powerless. Your free will's gone. You're owned. So St. Paul says this a little bit later on in Romans. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I do. And that's St. Paul. Are any of us better than him? It's a problem. It's a problem. We need to understand it so we can revel in the good stuff. This is man's fate apart from the help of the Holy Spirit, apart from the help of God, apart from the salvation of Jesus Christ. This is man's fate. We are powerless against the dominion of sin. We're sold into slavery. We're in the hands of a trafficker, and his goal is to use, abuse, mock, and humiliate us for eternity. That's what he wants for us. To lighten things up for just a second, take a breather. Is anybody here from Canada? Good. I can rag on. No, if there was anybody, I'd just ask your indulgence. Let me tell this hypothetical story just to give an illustration. Imagine you've been warned against going to Canada. Bad things happen in Canada. You don't want to go to Canada. Okay? This is all hypothetical. Okay? You've been warned against that. You don't do that. But somehow, you see an advertisement on TV, somebody talks to you into it, and you go, oh, let's go party in Canada for the weekend. And you go, and as soon as you cross the border, bam, they grab you, they grab your passport, they take it away from you, they do not let you back into your own country, and they mock and humiliate you and beat you up for the rest of the time that you're there, which is forever because you can't get away. That's being owned. That's being captured. That's a little bit of a silly story, but that's, when you put it in physical terms, because we don't understand the spiritual side very well, when you put it in physical terms, sometimes it helps to understand it. That's sort of where we're at. Evil Canada's got us. Adam and Eve did that to the entire human race. Because when she did this, and then when he followed along, which he shouldn't have done, it sort of broke the spiritual DNA. Just like if you have a problem in physical DNA, you can pass down genes to the next generation. We've got it, right? Our DNA is a little bit broken because of what they did. That's sort of the way it passed down. Why are we suffering for this? Because our spiritual DNA is broken. Another way to look at it is they sold themselves into slavery. Are the children of slaves born free or born into slavery? Boom, 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 boom. Just keeps going. Now that's original sin. And our baptism wipes that away. So we don't have to worry about that. If we're baptized, that's been wiped away. But we can still commit actual sin and sell ourselves back to the trafficker. That's actual sin. That's what we don't want to do. I promise the good news is coming soon. Let me just do a quick recap. Sin is a power. And even when we're talking about the individual sins, the actions that we do or do not do, they're not just some silly list of rules. That's not what it is. A sin, this one's big, this one should be in bold. A sin is that which is bad for us spiritually. We understand a lot about the physical world. We understand what's bad for us physically. We don't quite understand what's bad for us spiritually. But God knows, and he warns us out of love because he's a good father. Now, another way to look at this, and I came up with this, so I'm kind of proud of this. He gives us a spiritual injury notice, S-I-N. I can't find that anywhere on the web. I think I came up with that. I thought it was kind of clever. It's cute anyway. So it's important to understand that avoiding sin isn't following the rules. It's trusting that a loving father has the best intention for us and trusting him that he's telling us, don't put your hand on the burner. I don't have time to explain it to you. Maybe you wouldn't even understand it. Just trust me. I created both the physical and the spiritual world. I know how things work. You don't understand the spiritual world very well. I'm going to warn you. I'm going to give you that spiritual injury notice. We have to trust him. Now, if you're sitting here at this point of the talk, and there's still some part of you that thinks that sins are rules-based list of things that exist to shame you, it's because the enemy's lies are very good. If there's still a part of you that thinks that, the enemy is still got you a little bit. That's not what it is. It's a good father warning you not to put your hand on the burner. That'll hurt you. Don't be deceived. The enemy wants you to think it's some arbitrary list because then you can just laugh it off. That's what the world wants you to do. That's what culture wants you to do. Just laugh it off. The deception serves his purpose. What's his purpose? He doesn't want the party to happen in heaven. So if we think it's some silly list of rules and we can do that, then we separate ourselves from God, the party doesn't happen, and the enemy wins. And the enemy didn't have to go up against God to do it, which is good for the enemy because the enemy can't win against God, but he can trick us. So we don't want to do that. He still accomplished his objective, which is to keep us out of heaven. Good news. Everybody take a deep breath. Okay. So here's the good news. How would you describe Jesus? What are some adjectives that describe Jesus? Teacher? Merciful? Love? Gracious? Giving? I came up with these. He's gentle, patient, loving, forgiving, merciful, some of which I heard. We sometimes forget, because we've got this picture of him, this gentle thing, and all kind of, he's also utterly unconquerable. He's God. We sometimes forget that because we think of all those nice adjectives. He's utterly unconquerable when it comes to a fight. So why did Jesus become man and appear in history? First letter of John tells us that he came to destroy the works of the devil. That is the purpose that he came. That is the purpose he was incarnate, was to fight for us. He came to fight for us. Plus he did teaching, plus he did miracles, plus he revealed the heart of the Father. There was a whole bunch of other things he did while he was here. But primarily he came to fight for us. How did he fight for us? Jesus fights for us in the way that an ambush predator fights. What do I mean by that? You know what an ambush predator is? It's a predator that sort of like stays really quiet, maybe like an alligator stays below the waterline, waits for something to get really close, and then bow. Or a spider that waits for something to get really close, bow. Okay? An ambush predator just sort of sits there and waits for the prey to get really, really close, and then pounces. And that's what Jesus did. He set a trap for the enemy. It's interesting that he had to do this, but it's the way he had to do it. Look at the Passion. Look at what happened after Holy Thursday, leading into Good Friday. Jesus goes out to the Garden of Gethsemane. Judas shows up with the guards. And Jesus allows himself, Jesus is God. He's utterly unconquerable. Jesus allows himself to be captured, shackled, punched, spit upon, crown of thorns, beaten, mocked, scourged, and nailed to a tree. God allows himself to be nailed to a tree. He must want that to happen, because you can't do that to God unless God wants that to happen. So why does Jesus want to be crucified? Because that's where he wins the battle for us. That's the moment. That's the location where he wins the battle. How does Jesus win the war there? St. Augustine, in the 4th century, describes it this way. He says, the cross, the crucifixion is like a mousetrap. The wood of the cross is like the wooden base of the mousetrap. The bait in the mousetrap is the humanity, the human side of Jesus. And then the enemy comes and takes the bait, and the divinity of Jesus is that bar that comes over and destroys the enemy. It's an interesting analogy. Jesus had to come in disguise to have the crowd condemn him. If you were in the crowd and you knew for certain that that was God, would you be shouting, "Crucify him, crucify him"? He had to be hidden. Ambush predator. He had to get the enemy to come after him. Why? He could just to the enemy. Because God, even with the enemy, respects the free will that he gave us, which is a good thing, because every once in a while, each of us opposes God in some way. And would you like to be annihilated the first time you opposed God? Not a good thing. So he allows free will to happen, because that's the way he set it up. It's the only way that love works, so it's got to happen that way. So he respects free will even of the enemy. And the early church said that Jesus, it's fitting that, well, the actual quote is, "It's only fitting that the one who deceived our race at the beginning should himself be deceived at the end." Flipped it around. Jesus wins by deceiving the deceiver. And then once the enemy takes the bait, Jesus explodes sin and death from the inside, because the enemy took the bait. The enemy is defeated, but not yet destroyed. So, the rescue mission. Going back to Canada, you're powerless to get out of Canada. But being saved is the rescue mission that Jesus launches to come get you and bring you home. We can't get out of where we're being held, but Jesus is utterly unconquerable. He comes and gets you. Colossians says, he has delivered us from the dominion of darkness to the kingdom of the beloved Son. Jesus comes, gets you, and brings you home. And he'll do it several times. As many times as we mess up, he'll come get you. That's why that's why the good news is the good news. So what's our response to all this? Or what should our response be? Well, what should we do as Christians? Our response is to have faith, to live our faith authentically, and to share that faith. Most importantly, it's to stay close to God, because God is infinitely more powerful than the enemy. The enemy's more powerful than us, but if we stay close to God, we've got a good bodyguard, utterly unconquerable fighter who's on our side. So we end up being more powerful as a team. So let's go back to those original questions and then wrap up. Whoop. You know I said the third thing. I didn't get nothing. Okay. So let's go back to those questions that I asked, and we'll wrap up. One of them I'm going to talk about for a few minutes. The others are pretty quick. So reviewing the questions. Why is the world so messed up? Well, in short, because God wants us to be able to love. Therefore, he gave us free will because that's a mandatory requirement of loving. But free will allows for evil. It's the way it works. So this world's messed up. Some people ask, well, didn't God know that there was going to be all this suffering and pain and death and evil because of this? Of course he did. He's God. We're not the only ones that can figure it out. God knew it was going to happen. But apparently, this must be the best way it could possibly happen. I'm sure if there was a better way, God would have chosen that way because he's a loving God. But the price to pay for being able to love is having the capacity for evil. It's just the way it works. You can't have the good without the possibility of bad. Otherwise, good would have no meaning. It's just bad that we have bad. Now, it's not, when we look at the world and how messed up it is right now, it's not just that people are this evil. It's not that. It's that we have an enemy. And that enemy taunts and tempts and does all this kind of stuff. We have an enemy that has demons on his side, that has human servants on his side, and he's trying to make the world a really bad place right now. Now, my personal belief, and I like to put this in brackets anytime I'm talking like this, if it's a personal belief, I just put this out there as this my personal feeling. My personal belief is the vast, vast majority of people on this planet are good. They've got good hearts. They want to do good things. They're just driven by that. And there's a comparatively small number of people, like in the thousands, who are truly, truly evil, who are actually legitimately aligned themselves with the enemy. But they're troublemakers. That's putting it lightly. They're crafty. They're evil. They go into Scripture and take out Bible verses and twist them just a little bit so they can get good people like us to follow along with their agenda, because they trick us. We got to be careful about that. They trick us to promoting an agenda that we think is good, but it's actually evil. We've got to be on guard. And I think that's what a good portion of what the world is doing right now is about. For instance, there's a slogan out there, love is love, which sounds very innocuous. Sounds great, actually. The whole reason God created the universe was love. How could you argue with love? Love is love. That's great. That's wonderful. How could you argue with that? It's like blue is blue. Who could argue with that? And it's a great word, love. Good people with good hearts that want to promote a good agenda repeat that. They get a bumper sticker. They put it on their car. The problem is love is not love. All love is not the same. Think about this. Where's the problem? The problem is that it's vague. Every time you see something vague, there might be evil behind it. Be very careful. And if you ask somebody to clarify themselves and they refuse to do so, you cannot trust that person. Love is vague. And the problem is that slogan, which sounds so good, is being used to sexually target children. Because love is love. Right? You start with everything that we can accept because it's just a slight departure from the norm. And eventually you get to the point where, well, that 8-year-old has consented. Love is love. Be careful of tricky slogans like that. Good people with good hearts, with good intentions, are going along with evil agendas. That's just one example. The truly evil people that love vague things get things across through good people. We got to be careful about that. It's sort of like saying, water is water. Who could argue with that? Water is water. You have somebody come over to your house. You say, would you like something to drink? Yeah, I'd like some water. Great. First door on your left. It's the bathroom. Go ahead, drink out of the toilet. Water's water. How is it that in the physical world we understand that water is not water, but love is love? No, I love chocolate is different than I love my wife. Two different things. So why is the world messed up? We have free will, which allows evil, and we have an enemy that loves to amplify the evil. Takes the inherent messed up part of our nature and amplifies it. Takes the bad and just takes it up a notch. Next, how does God fix it? There's two parts to this answer. When I first put this together, I only meant to answer the first part, but the talk has morphed into both parts because of the way the questions worked out. Two parts are, there's a personal level to this, and there's a worldwide level to this. The personal level is easy. God sent his son to save you, period. It does not matter how crazy the world gets. It does not matter if everything falls apart. Today, tomorrow, next week, next year, it does not matter. However crazy the world works, that promise is a promise made to you by God, and it cannot be taken away from you. Your salvation, your eternal salvation, is a gift that no one can take away. You have to cooperate with God's grace, but nobody can take it away from you. The craziness cannot take it away from you. The chaos cannot do that. On a worldwide level, if we look at what's God going to do to fix it on a worldwide level, I happen to cling to one particular Bible verse, 2 Chronicles 7:14. 2 Chronicles 7:14 says this: "If my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, I will hear them from heaven, I will forgive their sins and heal their land." I hold on to that verse, 2 Chronicles 7:14. I like it. And I genuinely think that there are more people praying for salvation of the world now than has ever been in the history of the world. Not simply because there are more people on the planet. I think a larger percentage of people are awake and understanding this. Now, the only way I think that this healing can be quick and painless is if God came and took all our free wills away and sort of wiped the hard drive and started from scratch, and I know that's not going to happen. So the healing may not be quick and painless. But if it's God's will that it happens, it will happen that way. My opinion is that I believe that there are brave people trying to win back this world for God, and that God is protecting them. It's just a personal opinion. Now, this next section is a personal tangent. I never intended to answer the question, will God fix the world? But because of those provocative questions I threw out there to promote the talk, somebody misunderstood it and said, it's going to be a talk on the state of the world. No, I didn't mean to say that. But as I was putting my notes together, I knew that there were some people who thought that, so I said, something triggered in my head as I'm putting the notes together. It's like, bam, all of a sudden, boom, something came to me, so I'm going to share it with you. When we ask, will God fix this messed up world? Perhaps the answer is actually in the question. I don't pretend to know the mind of God, but I think the following is plausible. From the Kerygma, everything we've discussed so far, from the Kerygma, we know that spiritually, we have an enemy. That enemy despises us, and he wants to enslave and humiliate us for all eternity. We know that. The enemy offers enticements, temptations, and he lies in order to get us to sin. Oh, it's no big deal. Take the next step. Move a little closer. Spiritually, a lot of people have accepted that deal. They like it. So they've sold themselves into slavery to sin. The right answer would be to recognize the enemy, reject the enemy, and say, no, I want to live a free life, and with God's help, I can do that. But because we can't see the spiritual side of our lives as easily as we see the physical, it's easy to drift into a bad situation. It takes intentional effort to be aware of the spiritual side. So that's the spiritual side. Now let's talk about the world we live in. See if you can catch the parallel. For a lot of people, not everybody, but for a lot of people, the most pressing danger in the world right now is the question of whether or not we can continue to live free. Can we continue to live as free people? Or if we're going to become slaves to people who despise us, who want to control every aspect of our lives, what we say, what we eat, who we can associate with, what we can own, where we can live, all this kind of stuff. Some people are okay with that. They like it. They say they're going to take care of me. Some people have sold themselves into that. They accept the deal, the lies. But a lot more people are finally understanding that it's important to reject the enemy, to reject the lies, to recognize it and reject it. It takes effort to be free because the alternative is effectively slavery. For the first time, people are realizing that they might be captured by powers they are powerless to fight against. They can't resist. Do you see the parallel there? Could it be, and again, I don't pretend to know the mind of God, but as I was putting the notes together, this came to me, so I'm sharing it with you. Could it be that God is allowing this time in the world? This is his way of waking us out of our slumber. so that we recognize and reject the enemy that's working in the world? Could this be God's mercy? That billions of people can wake up to the effect that the enemy is having in this world. It's so obvious that people are waking up. There's college campuses where revivals are going on. There's amazing things happening. I myself came to faith because I saw truth leaving the world. And this was 12 years ago. What's happening now is so much more in your face. Whether we want to talk about the physical world or the spiritual world, if we want our freedom, it comes at a price. Our vigilance, our commitment to act on truth and not our feelings, our commitment to think about long-term consequences and not just how it feels today, our commitment to inspect and reject the lies of the enemy, and then when we fail, to humble ourselves before God, ask forgiveness, and to be better. That's the end of the tangent. Now on to the last two questions. These are really quick and we're done. Why exactly is it that Jesus needs to save us? I think I've covered that. Canada was the answer. You get the salvation part? We voluntarily sell ourselves into sin sometimes. And by ourselves, we are powerless to break free. But because God loves us, he gives us an unconquerable fighter who will come and rescue us when we need it. That one's an easy answer. Lastly, in the epic battle between good and evil that we're seeing play out in front of our lives, in the epic battle between good and evil, who wins and why? It's a tricky answer. Prevail. It's a tricky answer because our enemy is a creature, right? He can't even remotely challenge God. In a fight between the two of them, there's no question. But remember, the enemy doesn't have to beat God in order to win. What's his goal? To break up the party in heaven. All the enemy has to do is deceive us. We are vulnerable. God's not, but we are. It's up to us to not be deceived. We have to not fall for cute slogans. We need to think things through. We need to pray for guidance and wisdom when we're not sure about things. Ask God to show you what is true. Not necessarily what aligns with what you've always thought, but what is true in this crazy, lying world right now. God, please tell me what is true. And if it's different than what I think, enlighten me. I want to be on the side of truth. We need to trust God's warnings so that we don't wander off and get captured by the enemy. And remember, we may be vulnerable, but God never loses a battle. He never loses a battle. All you have to do is stay close to God. God always wins. Thanks for listening. God bless you. God bless our country. And God bless the church all throughout the world.